Planning an event and wondering how you can give your attendees the best experience possible? Take advantage of customized meetings with Hilton that make it easier than ever to incorporate health, wellness, entertainment, and waste reduction. From yoga and yogurt morning starts to puppies and ice cream afternoon breaks, Hilton will help you build an extraordinary meeting that attendees will remember. To book your next meeting or event, go to meetings.hilton.com. That's meetings.hilton.com.
Are you a follower?
9, 8,
Okay, so we're gonna do the
Welcome to GatherGeeks, a podcast by BizBash, the place where people passionate about meetings and events come together. Here are your hosts, BizBash CEO David Adler and Editor-in-Chief Beth Kormanik.
Hi, David.
Hey, Beth, here we are, another GatherGeeks.
Today, our guest is JB Miller. He's president and CEO of Empire Entertainment, an event production company that he started 25 years ago. His background is in television production, which sounds like it has really informed how he thinks about the narrative of an event. It's also prepared him for working with celebrities and high stakes events. One recent example is the listening party for Kanye West's recent album in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, that had everybody talking. That was an event that the agency MVD Inc. brought them in for. He's also worked on numerous charity galas, major conferences, and more. David, you spoke with him recently. Tee that up for us.
Yeah, no, we're doing this special sort of art project on what you look like when you see a first impression with a company called Zipster. And we did a photo shoot, which we're planning on continuing with lots of event pros. And we had a chance to sit down with him at the photo shoot to talk about all his theories about events, what works, what doesn't work. He's one of the smartest people I know in the event industry. He has theories. He has ways of looking at the world in ways that I think will help everybody else understand how to do their jobs better.
Right. He's going to share his philosophy of mapping out event narratives. He's going to talk about the boundaries of what an event production company is responsible for versus the client, and why he says there's never been a more exciting time to be in experiential or events. Let's listen.
We're here to talk about first impressions. You're an event producer, and how important is that first impression for your event production, starting with that?
I think it really depends on the nature of the story that we're telling. Some events are done to inspire people. Some are meant to make them enjoy. Some are meant to make them think something. And I think the impression is very much contingent on what the nature of the objective is, for the event. In all instances, making a first impression can be a strong framing of the experience to come. So,
but do you think that a first impression is important in all those types of activities?
Yeah, I think there's
just a different way of strategizing and what it is.
Yeah, there's a natural behavioral tendency to want to classify things and to do it quickly. That's how we sort of make sense of a chaotic world.
The blink philosophy, it's kind of...
Well, you just look at something and you're like, okay, you're a 1, a 2, or a 3. And we are very reductive in the way that we look at things quickly. And sometimes you want to have that work to your favor because you want to simplify things and move them quickly along the pathway to the decision that you want them to make. And sometimes you want to disrupt that first impression and make them realize that what they first saw was not at all what this actually is.
And what's an example of when you did that?
So I made a movie. It's not a event example, but some years ago I made a movie called The Cruise about a documentary. It was about a New York City double-decker tour bus guide that my brother Bennett Miller directed. And at first glance, this is this young kid with scraggly hair, with acne, who's got this high-pitched, whiny voice, and you wouldn't, if you met him at a party, you'd move on from him in like 10 seconds. But as the movie forces you to pay attention to him and get to know him a little bit, the layers of the onion start to come off, and you start to realize that this might be one of the most beautiful people that you've ever met. And that, I think, was really eye-opening for a lot of audience members who think that, when you're used to a character and it's like, Superman, he's a two-dimensional guy. When you start seeing somebody that's a multi-dimensional person, it starts to open up new vistas of understanding. That's the best example I can think of.
Is there an idea that the complexity of the first impression has to get more sophisticated now, based on the way you're thinking about it? It can't be two-dimensional, even in an event?
No, look. Many times the event narrative begins, as you've pointed out, with the invitation or the first, are you free? And that color palette, that messaging kind of lands on you, and then there's a strong tendency to maintain a consistency from the first impression to the follow-up afterwards. And that reinforcement, that repetition of color palette, of messaging can be very effective in getting a story across. But it can also be numbing. It can put the subject in a sort of lazy chair of observational passivity. I don't know how to pronounce that word.
Wow. So go back to your narrative concept.
Right.
I mean, you obviously have a philosophy that everything's about storytelling of some sort. Mm-hmm. And so how does that translate into the real world when you're producing events?
Well, I think I tend to think first in terms of what is the overall story that we're going to tell. And it's not usually something one-dimensional. It's not usually like, this is cool, you should buy it, or, this is the funkiest, sexiest event you'll ever attend. It's more of a journey that kind of builds itself in an argument. And when I sort of map out like an event narrative for me, I typically put in at least two different threads. One is the emotional narrative. How does it inspire you? How does it anger you? How does it make you happy? How does it make you desire something? And how we take people down an emotional path. But then there's the other side of the brain where we really focus on, what are the logical operators? How do we build a rational argument that also complements the emotional journey? And then how do we use both of those extremes to tell a more effective narrative that is stickier, to the individual? Not all parties and events get this deep, but that's at least how I like to look at the work I do.
But how does that translate into a physical document, or how do you infuse your team with this kind of thinking, or is it just out of you just know it?
For me, it just sort of crystallizes quickly. But I find that in order to express it, not so much to my team, but to clients and to their clients and the various constituencies that are involved in these bigger productions, you need to kind of break it down a little bit so that different people can follow, right? Some individuals are really going to focus on what is the messaging hierarchy and how is our core messaging making it and how are we adapting this back to our objectives and how are we tying this back to ROI. Those are the people that are really looking at the rational side of the argument and saying, does this connect in all the places that I expect it to? At the same time, that event isn't going to lift anybody's mindset. So you need to add the other elements of delight, surprise, fear, enticement, desire, excitement, all of those things.
But how does that, I'm trying to dig a little deeper.
Sure.
How does that translate? How do you take this theory and actually make it into the plan?
Sure. So
for people out there listening,
sure,
say that, yes, I understand that we need to do that,
right,
but how do you really do it?
Okay,
You're J.B. Miller, you should know.
So I'm talking right now about events and programs where you have a variety of different communication elements, where we have remarks and speakers and different speakers and participants and videos and graphics and signage and touch points and discoverable elements along the way. So those are a sophisticated series of elements that we have to color forms, out on a board and put into, some kind of linear sequence that begins with the arrival and ends with the go away. I tend to first think about in very reductive terms, like, okay, hey, you're this kind of a person. You're here because it's this kind of an environment. And then I think about, okay, my first impression is going to be, usually with the door or the facade treatment. Like, as I walk up to the venue, do I want people to have a sense of foreboding? Do I want them to be like, holy shit, this is going to be, baller? Like, you can establish it from there. Then the interaction when you come in, and, usually you have to register and check in for an event. And I'll leave aside, the failures of like, it took me 35 minutes, I was waiting online, they had to swipe my credit card, then I had to do it twice. Those are failures. A real check-in experience is when somebody comes, and not only is it quick and efficient, but it also sort of adds a little value, like gives you a little bit more of that plot driving component.
That's the number one bad impression when it's not done right.
It can be that, bad food, the music was too loud, my seat was terrible, I had a compromised sight line, it was next to a bathroom and it smelled. There's a lot of worse things that can happen. But I think going back to your earlier question, I look at all those different ingredients or elements. First, I sort of lay it out and I put it in very simple bullets, like, I'm a this is why I'm here. I've discovered this, I get engaged by this, I get interested by this, I get interactive about this. I then have some sort of false finale, then I have some catharsis, then I have some sharing and some engagement, and then I want to share it and become an avatar, or a proponent of what I've learned in the event. So that's the sort of like core objective narrative that I write out. And then from that, I start to say, okay, well, how would the food conspire to help tell that story? How would the lighting changes do that? How would phases or chapters of an event play into telling that story? And then screen content and speakers, and how would I use music and all of those other kinds of things. So it's like we build a wireframe of messaging, and then we start painting it and slathering on the sort of elements, the facades.
And how many personas are you going to run through the journey? Is it just one persona or a whole series of personas?
So I'm not sure if I'm answering the right question, but I will put myself in not just one person's shoes as I walk through the event, but I'll say, how does this look to a woman? How does this look to...
So those are the different personas then. Are you using persona thinking, or is it not?
I think it's helpful to put yourself in the journey of the attendee,
right.
Because if you don't, you're going to miss the stuff that's important to them.
Yeah.
But I think to only consider one person's perspective is sort of, it's flat, and it doesn't really answer all the things. You can do the best event for somebody who's a 26-year-old white male from New York City, but if you also have somebody that's just relocated from the West Coast at the same event, they may have a very different experience and not intentionally the one that you've put forwards.
Do you need do better events without diversity? Are they cleaner and easier to design, or is the diversity good? Because you're dealing with so many different generations and different tastes and different things.
I think a great event provides like the Venn diagram center. Like there's something for everything in a great event, and not everybody's going to love every aspect of it. You're always going to have a certain percentage of people that just sort of hated one aspect or didn't understand something that you were doing. But we do program for the middle, and I think being a centrist, if you will, allows you to hit the notes for the majority of the attendees.
How about the responsibility for the outcome of an event? As the planner, at what point do conversations occur to get to people to take an action? Or, how do you program in that? And
sure. It depends on the action that you want them to take.
This is very broad.
A purchase could be one action. Adopting a certain style or product, becoming an influencer or a proponent or a promoter of that product could be another. Or in a lot of the work that I'm doing in sort of not-for-profit, like how do you get people to adopt one of the strategic development goals or care about water projects or things like that. I think with each goal, there's a different call to action and there's a different definition of what that action looks like. But we use a lot of different devices. The age-old one is we're going to show you in this event and explain to you why this is important. And if you come to that realization through what we've put in front of you, then you will, as an independent human being, feel inspired to act in any way.
That's like the strong narrative strategy in a sense.
Yeah,
right?
I think that's the oldest way. It's like the sort of, the Grecian sort of or Roman senators standing up there and sort of making these sort of rational arguments, to the populace, who turn around and say yes and then, adopt something. I think now, engagement, sometimes it's more effective if people find their own engagement. I can say, here's a big thing, text this or post this hashtag, and that's going to mean that a certain amount of money goes to this cause, or you become a follower, of this, and that's the metric that we're trying to do here. I think sometimes it's more valuable when, some are hidden off in the corner, in a little table, there's a little rolled up piece of paper, and written on it is something that's, deeply sort of meaningful, and the person just happened to be there. They happened to unroll it. It happened to touch them in this memorable way. And that's just a lot more effective than something that I, might have hit them over the head with a hammer to get
right,
across.
But that's an intentional action on the producer's part.
Sure, and seeding moments of epiphany throughout a space is part of what I think a good producer does.
I love that, seeding moment. That's a great line.
Yeah. Epiphany, could be a overly flattering word for buy a car.
When's the big event? Hilton is here for planners with their exclusive customized meetings. Become a wow maker and save time by letting Hilton help you present an extraordinary event, one that leads to memorable and meaningful connections. Visit meetings.hilton.com and let Hilton help you.
So I was in Toronto recently with a whole group of event people, and there's a charity there called Sick Kids, which is one of the biggest hospitals in Toronto. And they were talking about how they've shifted their strategy from the narrative of, oh my God, this poor kid, to anger.
Sally Struthers, hand wringing.
Oh my God, I want to kill people
Yeah.
when I see that now lately. But they're going to more anger based on what's going on in the world.
Sure.
Are you seeing that in the charity world at all? Is there a shift that's happening because of what's going on politically?
Yeah, I think when I first started in the business, there was a lot of hand-wringing and look how horrible hunger is in Africa and why can't we get HIV antiretrovirals to these children? It's just a question of money. And then, we kind of gave up on making people feel bad, and then we sort of started to make them feel good about, look at, your contribution can make such a difference. And then we started to tell more inspiring stories around that. And I think we realized that both of those approaches don't necessarily yield the results that we would deem appropriate for the magnitude of the issues, that we face in that place. So, it's not surprising that there's a growing spirit of activism, especially under this president, don't get me started, where it's felt that, those sort of soft approaches, making a rational argument to somebody, it's not enough. If you're not yelling at them or beating them up, you're not actually going to get, the effect that you want. And that passion, which is part of activism, can also play an important role in getting people inspired and incited to do something. I think the best approach that I've discovered is to educate the audience, let them really understand on their own terms what we're trying to get them to understand as important, and then let them come to it in their own way. Because some people are activists, some people are carers, some people are just doers, and different people get motivated to act in different ways.
So if you're too strong-armed now in these kind of events, it doesn't seem to work as well.
Well, you'll turn off a certain number of people,
no matter what. So that's part of the strategy. And how different is a charity from a product launch? Or products are now becoming activists as well.
Right. Well, there are commonalities where we're trying to get messages across and get people to act, whether it's a sale or a donation or an adoption of some idea.
Ideology.
I think there are certainly commonalities in there, but I don't think there's any one size fits all approach to it.
Right. Let's go back a little bit to the first impression piece in terms of when you present a plan to a client. Right. That's the time that they are making the biggest judgment possible, right?
Yes.
How do you articulate the vision of an event and make this journey look simple?
Right. So I use a few tools. I'm a big fan of the big idea. Some people will say, they'll build this journey and they'll tell you, like it's a murder mystery. They'll show you the little pieces and how it comes together. And then in the end, they sort of reveal the grand vision. To me, I want to go immediately to the client and get them to understand the big visionary idea behind this. Because after that, everything to me is details. So I focus a lot on, what is that grand concept? What's that powerful, motivating, organizing principle?
And do you hit it usually nail on the head when you come in and do that? Or could you be,
yes,
you need to know that this is going to resonate?
Sure. And look, some clients come to you with a very clear impression of what they want. They know their brand, they know exactly what they want to present, and they're coming to us to be their quote unquote activation partner to put that in place. Other clients, I would argue the better clients, are the ones that come to me and say, I have a problem. I need to sell more of these things, or I need to tell a better story around this. How can I do it? And they give us the latitude to work with them to say, well, what are the insights that we can glean, through behavioral, studies? What is it that we understand about the thing that you're trying to get across to people? And what is it that we understand about that audience? And then what is that other idea that somehow sort of straddles the gap between them and can bridge those two things? And then I focus on that idea, and that becomes the touchstone on which we can build everything else.
Are you finding clients are willing to budget for the research piece? Or is it intuitive on your side, or is it your own homework?
I'm not sophisticated enough to know, because I don't really survey clients. I just meet with them.
Yes.
But I don't think that they generally see that as something that's within the purview of what their event producer is responsible for.
Right. I mean, you're looking at this from a very sophisticated perspective.
Right. There's some strategy behind what we do.
Yeah.
I mean, this is experiential propaganda in many instances, and not for nefarious purposes. I mean, I don't take on projects that I don't believe, but at the same time, like, you are trying to manipulate, let's be honest about it, people into thinking something or acting in a certain way. The best projects are the ones where you're manipulating people to do something that they would have done anyway, and you're just prompting them to do it a little bit more efficiently.
Well, I think that my sort of perspective is that these events are becoming the new town squares in the world. Mm-hmm. And that the responsibility of the producer is to be responsible in how they are manipulating people. Right. Because everyone's complaining about Facebook, but we have more power than anyone in the world, because you've got direct power over these people's mood and what they're going to do the next minute. Yeah. No, fake news has a doppelganger in our field, and events that are sort of a false narrative are problematic. Yep. Going back to the invitation and things like that, the invitation. Yeah. How important is that when you're setting the stage for that first impression? So I think the invitation, like every touch point along the way, is an opportunity to further tell and dimensionalize the story. So the invitation tends to be the first well-articulated thing that lands in front of somebody, whether it's a digital invitation or a print invitation. But I think if you remember these old sort of Burma shave, billboards, where it was like each billboard along the road told a different piece of the story. It's the same kind of idea. The invitation tells something. The RSVP registration tells another thing. The arrival tells. The registration tells. The drink that goes in your hand. Each one is another brick in the wall. What about the last impression? How do you produce the last impression? I think the last impression, there is no such thing as the last impression. The last impression should be something that lives on your mind, and you replay it over and over. The best events that you've ever attended, you keep playing them back, and you keep having different realizations as you toy with them and compare them to things that you come across in your life. So the idea that, like, as the door is swinging and hitting your ass as you walk out the door, that's kind of the last time you'll think about that event, I think is a misnomer. I think the idea is the event should continue to resonate with you, potentially for the rest of your life, if you've done a good job. Well, I know producers that are talking about things that they did 10 years ago and still remembering it and bringing it up all the time, even though they've seen everything. Right. Yeah. Your last impression becomes a dynamic thing. It becomes like a last inception, if I can use the Christopher Nolan, movie idea. You're incepting the audience to thinking something that they'll continue to toy with for some time to come. So, going back to a little bit of your personal history. Sure. Did you? I found that when I talk to a lot of people, they've done a lot of this stuff in high school and college. Mm-hmm. Did you? So I grew up making movies with my two younger brothers in Westchester. I did put parties on, even in my house. My mom and dad built a marionette theater, in a ski house that we had. So we would put on shows and write music and create lines and script and costumes and props. I like to mess around with pyrotechnics and things like that. So you were always one of those kids. Yeah, so I just kind of always liked putting creative productions, things together. And sometimes it was a concert, sometimes it was a film, or TV, but, it always involved putting
people together around a creative idea and figuring out a way to manifest it in a way that was then showable to other folks. And I just think I never lost that love, and have done it all my life and assimilated new skills through education, work experience, on different sides, but it all kind of helps me be a producer.
And you also, Empire, tell us a little bit about Empire Entertainment.
Sure.
And you started this from nothing.
Right? So I had worked for, I'd interned for David Letterman. I had worked for what's now Live Nation, was then called Ron Delsner Concerts. I had worked for MTV, and I had worked for a company called Overland Entertainment, which is still around, as their VP of Sales and Marketing and head talent booker. In 1993, which is 25 years ago this year, I decided to start my own company because I realized that there was a bigger opportunity to produce a broader scope of things for a wider range of clients than we were currently doing at the time. So I called a friend of mine who was a lawyer who owned a couple of record stores, and I asked him to partner up with me, and he said, "I'll quit today." And together we started, Empire in '93. I bought him out, and sold him my management business that we'd started together around 2009. So I today own the whole company. It's just grown. Today we've produced events in over 100 countries. We've had the privilege to work with the most extraordinary people and talents, throughout the world. And it continues to be a really exciting and dynamic time. And there's never been a more exciting time to be in experiential or events.
Why?
I think people are discovering that the efficacy of putting people together in places and controlling the dimensional narrative around them is a much more effective way of telling a sticky story than anything else that we've ever discovered, including television and film and social media and digital and concerts and literature and all of these other kinds of things. So I think from a business standpoint, it's a more effective way of doing it. But I also think, on a more abstract basis, that as the human population moves from Maslow's hierarchy of lower needs, basic, food, shelter, water and so on, to the higher level needs of self-actualization. And as our disposable income becomes larger and things lose their excitement for us, experiences are what's left. And I think you and I have had this conversation before. I think there's this baseline of where you live your life, and you can live it, exactly according to where you are at a given moment. When you go to an event where there's great music and great food and great social experiences, that experience is elevated above the baseline. Just like when you have the flu, you're under the baseline, right? So I think, given the choice, humanity prefers and is becoming increasingly addicted to spending more time above the baseline. And that means more experiences that inspire us, excite us, make us laugh, make us feel something, and fun. And we are fortunate to be in the business of creating the above the baseline.
Yep. It's interesting. I was listening to Tom Peters on Recode a couple of days ago, and he was talking about how he believes that the big future is not AI, but is humanity, extreme humanity. And so I've been doing some articles on things like on intentional humanity. That event organizers need to become intentional humanists to make sure that they're placing these things, these moments in different places, and we don't just live based on AI and our spreadsheets and things like that. So it's the idea that the producer has to represent humanity in many cases, which I think you guys do tremendously well. Yeah,
I think we have a duty to think about the settings in which we place people and what we expect of them and what they expect of us. And, they are relying on us. When you walk into a movie theater and sit down, to see the latest Steven Spielberg or whatever it is, and the lights go down, you're basically putting yourself in the hands of that director for 90 minutes, 2 hours, and expecting them to take you on a journey. It's no different when you walk into one of our events. They are relying on us to be the custodian of their existence for the period of time that event exists.
Their time is the most valuable thing they have.
Their time is the most valuable thing. So, if they're going to lend it to us, we damn well better make good use of it with mutual benefit.
Right. So we're going to end right here, but I want to ask you how people can find you.
You can look me up on the web, which is www.empireentertainment.com. You can call me. 212-343-1645.
Good.
Or you can, I don't know, you'll find us.
Yeah, I think that's great. So thank you so much, JB.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
David, thanks for that. It was so interesting to me to hear him vocalize some of these theories. You hear about storytelling. That's a word that's used a lot in this industry. And he broke down how some of that works with this whole concept of the event narrative. Yeah, no, he is a filmmaker. So he is using his filmmaking skills, which is really all, we're creating a live film every time you do an event. So he's using some of those skills. His brother is one of the top directors, and he works with his brother a lot. And I think that you're seeing the how that collaboration shows itself in his events as well. I appreciated his comments about thinking about the guest and valuing their time, that you have a duty as an event planner to your guests and to make sure that, you are making good use of their time. You're filling it with interesting things. You're moving to, I think you said this, something like a mutually beneficial outcome. And, that's a point I think that is not always considered. Yeah. That, time is our most important resource. So Beth, what's going on at BizBash? I wanted to remind our listeners who aren't subscribers to the BizBash Daily newsletter that this really is something you should be getting in your inboxes every morning. What we do through that newsletter is send you our own BizBash stories that are new that day, as well as we compile top stories from around the industry with the top news, and then stories that might not be newsy, but they're ones that you're going to be talking about. So I just encourage everybody, if you're not already subscribed to the BizBash Daily, to go to bizbash.com/BizBash Daily. Get us delivered straight to your inbox every morning. I have, we sent out about 25 million of these a year, based on the aggregate of all the people that we're sending it out to. And I have people that run these huge companies that also send it to all their employees so that they can get a sense of what's going on. We call it peeking over the fence to see what other people are doing in the event industry. And it's one of the only ways you can do that. So I encourage people to take advantage of this incredible tool that our editorial team is putting a lot of effort into. Thanks, David. So before we sign off, let's thank our production team. Absolutely. Let's thank Claire Hoffman and Dave Nelson for putting the podcast together, for producing it, and for Rebecca Pappas for distributing it to all the channels so you can hear it just like right now. Until next time, David, gather on. Yeah, gather on.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or your favorite podcast app. We can be found on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Player FM, Google Play, and Pocket Cast. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. It helps others discover the GatherGeeks podcast. We'd also love to hear from you. You can leave feedback on Twitter @GatherGeeks or leave us an email, gathergeeks@bizbash.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode of GatherGeeks. Until then, gather on. A leader in event education, the Event Leadership Institute offers on-demand video classes, interviews with industry mavericks, and online instructor-led professional development courses taught by industry experts. Visit eventleadershipinstitute.com for more information and to see a schedule of upcoming classes.